left my notes backstage. So hi, I'm Allison Christensen. I've been studying here for the past 2 years. First of all, I would like to thank my graduate committee. So this is Dr. Quilly. Thank you so much for everything these past 2 years. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for being one of my main advisors this year, and Dr. Blaisdell for all of your insight with opera and being in this field. Calm down. So, when I first was thinking about pieces I wanted to do, I had my mind all over the place, and one of the audition excerpts for the clarinets this year was Capriccio Espagnol, which is actually one of my favorite pieces. When I first started playing in full orchestras when I was in 8th grade, 9th grade, we played an arrangement of the 4th and 5th movements of Capriccio Espagnol, and I went straight to the local music store and bought a 2-CD disc set of Rimsky-Korsakov favorites. So this piece is very, very near and dear to my heart. All right, so a little bit about Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. He lived from 1844 to 1908. He was very proud to be a Russian. He was in the military for a number of years, and his pride was very much reflected in his music. He was a part of the Mighty Handful, also known as the Russian Five, the Mighty Five. They have a couple of different nicknames, which included Balakirev, Borodin, Kui, Mussorgsky, and, of course, Rimsky-Korsakov. Some people that were not included in this group were Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff, because their music was too Western. It didn't have enough Russian nationalism to it. And these five worked really close to each other. They edited each other's music. They orchestrated each other's music, primarily Rimsky-Korsakov. He is one of the best orchestrators that has ever been around, so much that we use his orchestration book even to this day. I took an orchestration class last quarter, and we used his book as reference. One of the main composers that preceded the Mighty Five was Glinka, and a couple that preceded were Lyadov, Taneyev, and Glazunov, and they all epitomized this Russian nationalism. Some of Rimsky-Korsakov's most famous works were Capriccio Espagnol, Scheherazade, and Russian Easter Festival Overture. And the interesting thing about all three of these pieces is that they were composed within the same 2 years, 1887 to 1888. And these three pieces are the epitome of Rimsky-Korsakov. When you think about him, you think about Scheherazade, all the exoticism, the augmented seconds, chromaticism, extra percussion, and it's interesting when I found this out that these were all written so close to each other. After this, his style changed slightly because Wagner came onto the scene and influenced him. So, yeah, these three pieces. Tonight I'm focusing on Capriccio. This piece was a huge hit when it first came onto the scene. Rimsky-Korsakov wrote this piece in the middle of summer. He was working on something else and came across some sketches he wrote for a violin fantasy and decided to develop them into this full orchestra piece. When he did that, he was tailor-making it for the Russian symphony, his home symphony. The pieces that he wrote were all for this group. And when doing that, he wrote solos and excerpts that were specific to that group. So I think that his second violin section was probably a very strong one, and I'll explain that a little bit later. When they first read this piece, the musicians erupted in applause after every single movement. That's how much they loved it. And because they loved it, They played it extremely well. Rimsky-Korsakov took no credit as the conductor. He said this was all the musicians because they played it so well, and they enjoyed it so much it came across the audience. In the premiere, because they played it so it went without difficulties and sounded brilliant, the audience asked for an encore, and it's a little unusual because the piece is 15 to 17 minutes long, and usually you don't have encores on pieces that short. After the premiere, a critic wrote in a local newspaper that the piece, or that it was a magnificently orchestrated piece. And Rimsky-Korsakov actually had an aversion to that critique because and I'll just read this, the change of timbres, felicitous choice of melodic designs, and figuration patterns, exactly suiting each kind of instrument, brief virtuoso violin, or brief virtuoso cadenzas for solo instruments, etc., constitute here the very essence of the composition and not its garb or orchestrations. So it's not that the piece was magnificently orchestrated, even though it is. It was a brilliant composition for orchestra. And he was very passionate about that. During this time, in the late 19th century, there was this semi-musical fad of having Spanish-influenced music. And here's some of the more famous pieces that were inspired by Spain. Lalo's Symphony Espagnol, Bizet's Carmen, Chabrier's España. Now those three composers were all French, so it was very interesting to see that Rimsky-Korsakov decided to jump on this train, this fad, and wrote Capriccio Espagnol. Now, this piece in particular is based on music from Astoria or Asturias, depending on where you are. I don't know if you can see, it's a little blurry, but it's up here. It's in this, the northern part of Spain. And here are some photos from that area. I mean, how could you not be influenced or inspired to write anything what's being here? So not only is you're on the ocean, but there's mountains and lakes, and it's beautiful. One of the traditional folk songs and celebrations that happen is called the Alborada, and it's morning celebration music. And so this video I'm going to show you just a clip of contains a lot of the traditional Asturian instruments, like the gaita, which is the Spanish bagpipe. It's a little bit smaller. There's fringe decoration on it. The requinta, which is flute. There's a violin, which is played almost in a fiddle style. There's guitars, laudes, which is almost a Spanish flute. Not almost, it is a Spanish flute. And the tamboril, which is a snare drum, played very similarly to military drums, so it's down low, off, played on the hip, and then you play it with traditional stick positions. And the music in this clip contains some of the melodies and themes that Rimsky-Korsakov used in Capriccio Espagnol. So that's the loudest. And one of the other instruments that I'm not including in this section are the castanets. The castanets were from southern Spain, from the south of Spain, used in flamenco dancing. And I think Rimsky-Korsakov took that Spanish element and incorporated into this, even though it's not from the same area. So, going into the piece itself, the first movement is called Alborada. It's a very popular music in Astoria, and it's played at dawn. It includes a drone, which comes from the gaita, the bagpipe, and it's very percussive. So in this first movement, our drone is a pedal A in the cellos and basses, and it is there the entire movement. For the percussive element, there's triangle, tambourine, crash cymbals, bass drum, snare drum, timpani. It uses all 6 players. Here's a better picture of the gaita and traditional costumes that are worn. Used very frequently throughout this whole piece are guitar-like sounds. And the way that Rimsky-Korsakov achieved that was using a lot of open strings. So on the violin, one of the open strings is this E up here. And so normally string players don't like to use open strings because you can't vibrate and they're harder. If it changes pitch during your performance, you can't stop and retune. So it's a very rustic sound, and it's okay if that happens, because he wants to simulate guitar strumming and open strings. And another thing that he does quite frequently is a lot of pizzicato, which is plucking the string with your fingers. At one point in this first movement, if you join us for a concert later, you'll see violins actually pizzicato with both hands, using their right index finger and their left ring finger. And they have to go back and forth to simulate very fast strumming. So the actual melody in this movement is played by the clarinet. And I believe Rimsky-Korsakov chose the clarinet and set it in this register because it's bright, it's got a nasal quality, which is very similar to the gaita. And in this passage, as you can see, it's continuous, there's nowhere to breathe. So in this clip I'm going to show you is clarinetist Sean Osborne, who is based in the Seattle area, playing this excerpt. Yeah, so you can see that he didn't breathe the entire time. It was continuous, and those higher notes are very brilliant. Oh, okay. And so moving on to the second movement, it's called Variazioni, which is theme and variations, and that's a little interesting because that's a Western musical form. But anyway, so the theme is played by the 4 French horns in the orchestra. This is just the melody. This is taken from the first horn part. And it's supposed to be played very, very slowly and sweetly with a dark sound. And that's really easy to achieve after playing the first movement because it's like you're shifting gears down very, very fast. The theme has an emphasis on beat 2. So it starts on beat 2, and then every time there's a little lift here, right? It's right before beat 2, and then another one here, and there's another one, and then all of these are on beat 2. And so that's something to keep in mind as we go through the variations. Before we get to that, the final 2 measures, the harmonies beneath this theme are very simple. They're beautiful, but it could get boring after a while. So Rimsky-Korsakov added borrowed harmonies from the parallel minor. So in this, even though this is the horn part, this movement is in F major, so he borrows from F minor a lot. And I would like to play for you this opening with the horn section. Lifts after. So then we move on to the first variation. One of the main differences is that the phrases are now on beat 1 instead of beat 2. And the cello now has the melody instead of the horn has been transferred. And violins have also been introduced to the texture. And the way that Rimsky-Korsakov wrote this was having the cellos in a high tessitura, so on a high range of their instrument, which makes it a little bit brighter and will speak above easily, will be heard easily above the violins. There's more use of the borrowed chords from the from the parallel minor, and the flutes and clarinets enter who emphasize the harmonies. In the second variation, the biggest difference is that there's a poco meno mosso, so a little bit slower tempo, and there's an English horn solo. And the difference in this variation of the theme is ornamented. There's extra notes, there's some grace notes, and but it all fits the same theme and the same going to beat 2 feel. Also in this variation, instead of having a continuous melody, there's interjections and interruptions by the French horn, who goes back and forth between playing plays with open and plays with stop sounds. So the difference is having your hand just like this inside the bell and then actually closing off the tubing completely. And it creates this really brassy, nasally sound. Also in this section, the texture underneath is very different. The upper strings are tremoloing, which is really, really fast bows, and there's also extreme hairpins in all of the strings. And we do that to support the melody's changes and the harmonic changes. In the third variation, there's a much thicker texture. It's like there's a light bulb that went off. It's major, it's bright, it's happy, and the melody is now in all of the woodwinds and the first violin, so it's supported by many players. Also, there are double and triple stops in the strings, featuring open strings. And so double stops and triple stops are when the player plays more than one note at the same time, using multiple strings. More interruptions in a slightly different variety by cellos and basses, and then with the violins using the borrowed harmonies. And the main difference here is, you can't see it that well, but you can see it here. All of these are down bowed, so it's going to take a little bit longer than when the cellos and basses have it here. Because they just play as it comes, whereas the violins will have to dig in a little bit more into their string. In the fourth variation, we are in a new key. We are in E major with a B pedal, so we really feel like we have changed keys. We're in a new home. The melody is in the flutes and the oboes, French horns and cellos, so there's more people still. But there's this new counter melody in the second clarinet and violins. And it looks like it's very chromatic, but it's actually not. It's just in E major. They have to rewrite sharps and naturals because of the key signature. And the interesting thing in the texture here is that the violins are all pizzicato, and the second clarinet, who also has this melody, is slurring. So you have this very smooth texture coming from the back of the orchestra, and this very light and crisp texture coming from the front, which creates a really interesting timbre. In our fifth and final variation, we go back to our home key of F major, and the melody is still in the flutes and oboes and French horns, but has switched from cellos to now really high violin ones, as you can see. Lots of ledger lines, playing up an octave from when they played it before, the rhythmic support comes from the second violins in this section. And when I mentioned that his second violin section in the Russian symphony must have been strong is because all of the other rhythmic elements are not used in this variation. So all of the subdivision is heard in only the second violins. And not only that, but he has them divided. So only half of the violins are playing the 16th notes at a time. And so then we make our way to the Coda, which has a chromatic passage in the flute, which centers around F, and we go back and forth between. Oh, here's the text or the excerpt. Right? She will go. Well, she starts on a high F and then goes all the way down 2 octaves, and then just plays around with 1 octave. And then the violin, the first violins are playing the final phrase, the final phraselet of the theme to continue to emphasize our tonic as we head into our next movement. But to create intrigue, Rimsky-Korsakov uses the borrowed harmonies again. And he goes back and forth between what I call, or what I actually learned this from Dr. Quilly, plagal rocking. So we go back and forth between our tonic chord and our subdominant chord, our 4 chord. And so he goes back and forth, as you can see with the flats and the naturals, our F major and our F minor. And so that trill leads us right into the Alvarado, the 3rd movement. And it's very similar, but there are obviously many differences. First of all being the name. He changed the name just so that we could tell it is different. The key is one of the biggest changes between the first and the second movements. That's the ending. So it would sound very strange for us to end on an F major chord and then go to A major again, because that is not where F goes to in the circle of fifths. So when we hear F at the end of the movement, it makes us want to go to what the tonic would be next is B flat. The voicing of the melody is also changed. Instead of being in the violins, it's now in the upper woodwinds and the trumpet. So again, the timbre is changed. The strings are now all pizzicato the entire movement, with the exception of the very end. So it's very guitar-like in the way that they strum. They've all got multiple notes every beat. The solo line is not in the clarinet, but now in the first violin, the concertmaster. Notes are almost exactly the same, except just shifted up a half step. The percussion has a slight variation in the rhythms that they play. It's a little bit more active than the first movement. And the coda in each movement, so that the final few measures have different purposes. So in this first movement, it's piano, so it's very soft. There's a diminuendo and all the people playing. It's a thin texture, right? There's only strings and timpani, and it's winding down and it's very static, right? There's not a lot happening. Whereas in this third movement, that is not the case. There's I did not. Don't mind me. Okay. In this third movement, the ending it does start off pianissimo. However, there's a crescendo molto. It's hard to see, but it is actually written right there for players. Particularly, this is for the brass in particular. Timpani also has it down here. And the final two measures, as you can see, I had to use the whole page of the score because all the players, minus the harp and a few of the percussionists, play the final two chords. There's also an applied accelerando with this molto crescendo and with the rhythm, which is the same rhythm as the first movement, but with this there's an applied accelerando, which leads us straight into the fourth movement, which is called Cena e Canto Gitano, which is scene and singing gypsy. In this first section, there's a series of cadenzas and songs. And the gypsy song is passed around. So I won't read all of these, but this is the series. And there's interjections of like little songs, little bands, almost like a troupe walking around. Okay? And then each cadenza is supported by a percussion instrument of some sort, whether it's a triangle or a timpani or snare drum. Oh, and unfortunately, we don't have time to watch this, so I will skip that. So the gypsy song. This is when I typed into Google Asturian gypsy. This is one of the first pictures that popped up several times. Yeah. In this movement, there's fast rhythms. It's flashy. It's exciting. There's a playful melody that has offbeat entrances, accents, and grace notes. To accompany this active melody, there's a very simple bass line. So this is, you can see the bass line is just, oh, you can't see it, it's at the bottom down here. You can see it in the timpani, right? That's exactly what the cello is doing. And there's percussive elements here, the violas and the harp and the second clarinet. And then the melody happens, and you can see there's lots of offbeats, there's grace notes, there's accents, and it's very flamboyant and very flirty. In the middle of this, there are interruptions by the violins, low brass, and the percussion 3 times. The first time is the simplest of all, and then the second time there's more notes in the low brass, and snare drum starts earlier. And the third time, it is actually expanded into a melody in the woodwinds and guitar-like string accompaniment. And what you can see, it's on the previous page, all of these string parts actually have an up bow and down bow printing. So it's supposed to simulate like, okay, we're strumming the guitar this way. So up, down, up. It's really interesting to see them go like this. Yeah. And then we have the transition into the 5th movement, into the Fandango. Everything is even more flamboyant and percussive. It just builds and builds and builds. Here's an example of the flamboyancy in the violins. This isn't even the melody, this is just another percussive element. And in this section, Rimsky-Korsakov uses all 6 of the percussionists again. To get us into the Fandango, the interruption melody is used as transition material, except he's made it more chromatic, so it builds and builds and builds until we get to our final movement, the Fandango Asturiano. So I'll play just a little bit of this. This is traditional dancing to a Fandango in northern Spain. This movement is very joyous and very playful and very cute. In this first section, it simulates like ba-da-da-dum, bum, ba-da-da-dum. You can see the dancers moving around. It's also simple in terms of its harmonies. There's no chromaticism, and it's rustic with its open strings and lots of double stops. There's also a section I would like for you all to watch out for. The Saltando section in this final movement. Saltando is Italian for ricochet, and that's a term we use in English, but it's actually French. It's where you work with the natural bounce of the bow, and you work with gravity. So it bounces as you go down, and it's really hard to gain rhythmic precision. So composers usually use it as an effect. Of course, we all want it to be together, but it's really hard to get the precision between all of the players. The accented quarter at the end of each measure gives the ensemble a chance to be together and to regroup so that the next measure can be better. There's a few of these, what I like to call the music box sections. It's where all of a sudden this big loud sound becomes this very, very cute little intimate section where we have a lot of the high instruments playing. Simple harmonies, melodies, lots of melodies happening at the same time with the piccolo, flute, clarinet, violin and harp. And violin is using, in this version, harmonics to get even higher. You can see there. Those aren't double stops, those are harmonics. And then we finally get to the Coda, where the music is faster. It's actually music from the first and third movements. We've come full circle to our Alvarado music. The pulse is faster. We go from 126 beats per minute to 144. There's no pedal in the bass, and it's very aggressive. You can, again, you can't see, but up here you can see a little bit better. It goes, it doesn't stay on the same note, it moves. And then we get to this one of my favorite parts, where Rimsky-Korsakov has taken this motive from the theme of the Alborada and expands it, and is almost fixated on it, and it just spins and spins out of control until we get to the very end. And when we get to the end, it goes even faster. It's marked 152 beats per measure, and it's pushing to the end. There's lots of offbeat entrances, so it obscures the bar line, and it's very boisterous. And I would like to end with this clip from Leonard Bernstein conducting the finale. So this final end, the Coda, particularly the presto, and so it just goes faster and faster. And that ends my presentation. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope you can join us for the concert next door.
Thank you, Alex. Go ahead and make your way to the concert hall next door. We won't start till you get there.